The objective of the Glaze job is to organize Glaze application and apply Glaze to products. The equipment used includes a paint booth, a work table, racks on wheels for ceramic products, shelves for bags of dry ingredients, a powered mixer, an adjustable height cart for mixing stands, a scale, stools, sinks, a manually rotating pedestal to hold tile while the worker is hand painting, and buckets. The tools used include a taper, a bulb painter, a powered spray paint gun, a finishing knife, a whisk, a pitcher, a brush, a sponge, full 5-gallon buckets with glaze ingredients that weigh about 35 pounds, and a sieve or screen. The materials used include various ceramic products, glaze components in bags that weigh 50 pounds, and a glaze recipe book. The work environment is an inside work environment with heat and no air conditioning. The personal protective equipment includes floor mats, safety glasses, a respirator that is worn while spraying and mixing glaze, and an apron. The workers observed were 5 feet 11 inches tall and 5 feet 4 inches tall. There are 3 types of glaze applications: spray painting, dipping or pouring, and hand painting. It's important to note that 80 to 85% of products are sprayed. All tile products are sprayed, and 50% of vessels are sprayed. Dipping or pouring is used to apply glaze to 15% of products, all of which are vessels. Hand painting is used to apply glaze to selected tiles for approximately 5% of products. Hand painting is the most time-consuming and is mostly done using a bulb painting tool. Some other work tasks included mixing glazes, sorting various products, and finishing. Finishing consists of cleaning and wiping ceramic surfaces. Mixing glazes can sometimes take an entire day. Since several workers were observed doing glaze tasks distinct from each other, breaking down how each worker divides their time among tasks during a typical work week is an important step in analyzing this job. Worker 1, a female, reported that her time was allocated in the following breakdown. 20% of her time was spent mixing glaze. 5 to 10% was spent sorting. 15 to 20% was spent dipping vessels. 25% of her time was spent in the spray booth. An additional 20 to 25% of her time was spent hand painting. And finally, 5% of this worker's time was spent finishing. Worker 2, a male, reported that he spent his time during a typical work week in the following fashion. 0 to 1% of this worker's time was spent mixing glaze. 5 to 10% of his time was spent sorting. 60 to 80% of his time was spent in the spray booth spraying vessels. This equates to 3 full days per week. 5% of his time was spent hand painting, and 5% of his time was spent finishing. Additionally, a small variable amount of time was spent attending meetings each week. The most physically demanding tasks which were identified by the observed workers included spraying product, lifting buckets off of shelves, mixing glaze which included repetitive stress, and lifting bags of dry materials which weigh about 50 pounds. The hand painting task is performed both sitting and standing. The observed workers noted that this task can be strenuous. Hand painting involves fine detail work, so the product is typically held up close to the worker's eyes. The order of operations for the hand painting task are as follows. First, workers get a tray of tiles. Next, workers use a brush to remove dust and debris from the tile. Workers then wash tiles under running water at the sink. Next, they get a bucket of glaze. Workers then use the whisk to mix the glaze. Next, they fill the bulb painter with paint using an eyedropper. Then workers position the tile on the manually rotating pedestal. Next, they paint the tile using the bulb painter. Lastly, they position the tile on the tray when complete. Other tasks observed included constantly shifting the product from the cart to the paint booth, laying product out on trays, filling the powdered spray paint gun with glaze, and filling the bulb painter with paint. Additionally, cleaning the powdered spray paint gun and bulb painter was observed. The spray painting task takes approximately 1 hour to spray paint all products on the cart if they are the same product. If more than one glaze color is needed, it takes the workers approximately 2 to 3 hours to spray all of the products. The tasks associated with spray painting are as follows. First, workers will pick up and carry the tray of product. Next, workers position the tray on the pedestal in the spray booth. Workers then get a bucket of glaze. Then they pour glaze into the spray gun using a pitcher. Workers next spray product edges in all 4 directions. They then rotate the tray. Workers next spray the top surface from all directions. Workers spray 4 to 6 coats of glaze on each tray of products. They then measure glaze with a micrometer on the tiles to make sure the correct glaze thickness was applied. Next, workers will pick up and carry the tray of tiles. Workers wipe the bottom of the tray with a sponge. Finally, workers position the tray on the rack. Mixing ingredients breaks down into the following tasks. First, workers get a bucket with water. Next, they get a bin of dry ingredients. Workers then get a recipe book. They then get a scoop and measure dry ingredients using the scale. As they measure, they will add and subtract product as needed. Workers then pour ingredients into the bucket. They then lift the bucket and carry the bucket to the mixer. The bucket is then positioned on an adjustable height cart. Workers raise the bucket using a cart foot pedal. Workers then activate and start the mixer. They will then put the recipe book away. Workers will scrape the side of the bucket with a spatula as needed. When mixing is complete, workers stop the mixer. Next, workers lower the bucket. Workers will lift the bucket and carry it to the sink. Next, they will mix the glaze with a whisk. Workers then prepare the label. They position the label on the bucket. Next, workers will scoop glaze from a large bucket to the small bucket. Next, they mix the glaze with a brush. Workers then position the large bucket in the sink. Finally, workers will clean the large bucket with a sponge and water. There were several ergonomic risk factors observed for the glaze position. Repeated and sustained exertions were rated as a medium-high pace. Hands were in steady motion or exertion to spray and hand paint ceramic products with glaze. Sustained exertions were observed and included continuous standing, continuous neck flexion or forward bending, to hand paint ceramic products. Additionally, continuous neck and torso flexion and an elevated arm were observed to spray paint ceramic products. Forceful exertions were required to spray paint and hand paint ceramic products. To use the micrometer to measure glaze thickness. To lift and carry buckets of glaze, bags of dry ingredients, and trays of ceramic products. Finally, forceful exertions were required to scrape ceramic products with a knife. Awkward postures were observed and included torso and neck flexion, and an extended arm to spray glaze on ceramic products. extreme torso flexion, extended arm, forearm rotation, and wrist extension were observed when workers measured glaze thickness using a micrometer. Elevated arm to get glaze from the bucket and to fill the bulb painter with glaze was also observed. Elevated and extended arm and forearm rotation were observed when workers poured glaze into the spray gun. Wrist extension was also seen when workers wiped the vases with a sponge. Torso flexion and lateral bending were observed when workers positioned trays on the lower levels of the racks and elevated and extended arms to position trays on the upper rack levels. Neck flexion was observed while workers hand-painted tiles. Torso flexion and forearm rotation to cut open bags of dry ingredients were additionally observed. Workers used elevated and extended arms to measure the dry ingredients for making glaze, to operate the mixer controls, and to scrape the sides of the bucket using a spatula. Additionally observed was wrist extension, or backwards bending, to wipe the vase with a sponge and to clean the mixer with a sponge. Finally, torso flexion was observed when workers cleaned buckets in the sink. The mechanical or localized contact stress observed was contact stress between the forearms, hands, and fingers and the edges of the tools, materials, and equipment. The recommendations for the glaze job include: consider positioning 50-pound bags of dry ingredients on a lift table to decrease forceful exertions and awkward postures. Investigate purchasing the bags of dry ingredients in smaller weight bags to decrease forceful exertions. Consider using 2-person lifting teams for lifting 50-pound bags of dry ingredients to decrease forceful exertions. Investigate adjustable height and tilt pedestals in the spray paint booth to decrease awkward postures. Consider adjustable height and tilt pedestals for hand painting to decrease awkward postures and sustained exertions. Investigate using magnifying lights while hand painting to decrease posture stress and sustained exertions. Consider using articulating faucets with extended necks for washing buckets and other equipment to decrease posture stress.